Glasgow has seen its share of violent men, but few were like Hugh "Shug" Collins. He wasn't the kind of criminal you crossed twice. He grew up in Garngad, where violence was expected. That's why by his teens, he had already been slashed across the neck with a cleaver in a gang fight. By his early 20s, he was running protection rackets across the city's pubs and clubs, feared by anyone who handled cash or crossed the wrong people. And then came one night in 1977. Something terrible happened that changed everything in his life and made Collins a name remembered even decades later. But before we get to that night, you need to understand why he became that man. Because Hugh Collins didn't wake up one morning and decide to be Scotland's most feared enforcer. He was shaped by a world that rewarded violence. He was born in 1951 in Royston Hill, the part of Glasgow everyone called the Garngad. It wasn't just poor, it was a rough area. Back then, kids grew up surrounded by unemployment, gang fights, and drunks spilling out of pubs every night. His father was William "Wooly" Collins, who was already infamous long before Hugh could spell his own name. Wooly was a violent man who once slashed a dance hall manager across the face with a razor and got 10 years in prison for it. Hugh's mother left while his father was behind bars, and he was raised by his grandmother. It is no surprise that by the time Hugh was a teenager, he was already following the same path. Glasgow in the 60s was ruled by gangs like the Colton Tongs, the Cleans, and the Shamrock Crew. Every few streets had its own mob, and everyone was fighting for territory. Collins ran with the Shamrock. This group was known for blades, razors, and fear, and he was good at it. He once said he wasn't born violent, but in Garngad, you either fought or you were forgotten. One of his first scars came from a meat cleaver, swung by a rival gang member during a street fight. It cut from his jaw down toward his neck, deep enough to leave a jagged reminder that never healed right. The meat cleaver that nearly took his jaw off became part of his legend. By his late teens, he was already a hardened street soldier. By 21, he controlled protection rackets in some of Glasgow's busiest streets. Bars, clubs, and bookmakers paid him weekly, not because they wanted protection, but because they knew what would happen if they didn't. He ran the city centre, and he knew it. He used to say, whoever ran Sochi Hall and Buchanan Street ran Glasgow. He bragged that other gangs in Pollock or Maryhill were just amateurs. He was the man running the tune, but behind that ego was someone shaped by betrayal and anger. His father was his hero, and he was gone for most of his childhood. When Wooly came back from prison, he wasn't a hero anymore, just another bitter man. Hugh idolized him anyway. He used to tell classmates proudly that his dad was a bank robber. It made him feel powerful. And then there was his mother, in and out of his life. Unpredictable, sometimes present, mostly not. He said later that she was the reason he never trusted anyone fully, especially men. He hated men's bragging, their fake toughness, their lies, yet somehow he still wanted to be one of them. That contradiction of craving respect but hating what came with it would follow him his entire life. During the 1970s, Glasgow became more dangerous due to gangs. Money replaced pride, guns started showing up, and Collins went from street thug to professional enforcer. He collected debts for major figures and intimidated rivals. He knew how to make people talk or disappear, but violence had a rhythm in his world. It was as normal as work. He once said that everyone in Glasgow's underworld believed they were justified. They were protecting their own, defending their name, getting what was owed. That's how he saw it too. And then came that terrible night. April 2, 1977, inside the Luna 7 bar on Buchanan Street. Collins walked in with his friend and co-accused, Joe Devlin. The bar was packed, noisy, full of smoke, and cheap beer. Among the crowd was William "Willie" Mooney. He was a rival Collins already had bad blood with. Weeks before, Mooney had threatened Collins' nephew, a 14-year-old boy. In their world, that was enough to make it personal. As soon as Collins entered the bar, things spiraled out of control. Witnesses said there were insults, shoves, and then a sudden explosion of violence. Mooney pulled a bread knife, but Collins moved faster. He stabbed Mooney several times, once between the ribs, straight through. The fight ended in seconds. Mooney dropped to the floor, bleeding out as people screamed and scattered. Collins later said that he went completely berserk. Maybe that's why he didn't run. He didn't hide. When the police arrived, he stood there, quiet, blood on his hands. He already knew what was coming. He was put on trial for murder. The courtroom was full of journalists, families, and gang associates. Collins pleaded not guilty, insisting it was self-defense. His friend Joe Devlin turned on him, saying Collins had done it alone. Devlin was acquitted. Collins wasn't. When the guilty verdict came down, Mooney's widow screamed across the courtroom, calling Collins a rat and lunging at Devlin. Officers had to hold her back as fights broke out in the hallway. Collins just stood there. He had just received life imprisonment. Minimum 16 years. He was 26 years old, and the newspapers called him Scotland's most dangerous young man. If the streets had made him violent, prison turned him into something even worse. He was sent to Perth Prison, one of the toughest in the country. Within weeks, guards realized he couldn't be controlled. He refused orders, attacked staff, and intimidated other inmates. He lived for the fight. He said later that prison didn't scare him. It was just another version of the world he already knew. He spent most of his time in solitary confinement because no one wanted to share a cell with him. Every time the officers thought they had him under control, he would prove them wrong. There was this one time in jail when he was denied a transfer to a lifers wing in Glasgow. He got to know that his request was rejected because of an officer. This news sent him into a spiral, and he vowed to kill that officer. During a medical escort, Collins pulled out a sharpened needle and a craft knife he had smuggled in and attacked. He stabbed one officer 7 times, another 4 times, and went after a third before slipping on blood. He was beaten unconscious, dragged into a windowless underground cell, and left there for months. He said he was beaten twice a day. He said that he stayed there without any sunlight or sound. He didn't regret it though. He told an interviewer years later that he had enjoyed what he had done. That was the terrifying part about Collins. He wasn't a mindless brute. He was intelligent, strategic, and terrifyingly self-aware. He knew exactly what fear looked like and how to use it. He said, "Fear is an emotion I understand. I'd tell a man I'll be back in 5 minutes, and by the time I returned, his legs would go like jelly." By the 1980s, Hugh Collins was a problem for the entire Scottish prison service. Every guard knew his name. Every warden dreaded being assigned to his wing. They couldn't rehabilitate him, couldn't break him, couldn't reach him. They called him a sociopath, and maybe he was, but he wasn't stupid. He knew the label gave him power. As long as they feared him, he was in control. He spent years like that, stabbing, rebelling, and surviving while doing all that. He was kept in Perth, Peterhead, and Barlinnie at different times, always under high security. Rumors spread that he had been involved in 5 attempted murders that the courts couldn't prove. He became an urban legend among inmates, a man who couldn't be tamed. But beneath all the violence, something else was happening. The isolation started to change him. Not in a peaceful way, but in a way that made him think. He said later that for years he had been acting on instinct, not reflection. When you are alone that long, your mind starts showing you every ugly thing you have done. The prison guards eventually gave up trying to punish him. Beatings didn't work. Lockdowns didn't work. He would fight anyone, anytime. That's when they decided to move him to a new experiment, something called the Barlinnie Special Unit. It was designed for prisoners who were too violent for regular jails. But instead of punishment, it offered something else. It gave him open doors, art, therapy, and self-responsibility. Most thought it was ridiculous. Giving freedom to Scotland's most violent men is madness. When Collins first arrived, he didn't believe it either. He thought it was a trick, another setup, another mind game. But in the special unit, something different happened. The man who had spent years using knives and fists was suddenly given paintbrushes, books, and a kind of freedom he had never known. It didn't fix him overnight, but it started something. And that's where his story begins to twist. From this point on, the same man who once stabbed guards in cold blood would start creating art that ended up in galleries. He began drawing religious figures, violent faces, and distorted shapes that mirrored his own chaos. One day, he carved a rough sculpture of Christ on the cross. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The staff were shocked. The man who once carved scars into people's faces was now carving meaning into stone. Collins became the special unit's greatest surprise. The same energy that made him a danger on the streets now made him brilliant with a chisel. He later created stone animals for Edinburgh Zoo, designed so blind visitors could feel every detail. He said he liked leaving the surfaces rough because life shouldn't be polished. That was his philosophy now. He kept creating. Day after day, the violence started to fade. His work caught attention outside the walls, and people began to wonder if the impossible was happening, if Scotland's most feared prisoner was actually changing. When he finally got out in the early 1990s, Collins was no longer the same man who went in. He had spent more than a decade locked up, and another few years learning to control his anger through art. Outside, he was given a chance to work with Edinburgh's 369 Gallery, where he met Caroline McNern, an artist who saw something worth saving. She became his mentor, then his partner, and finally, his wife. Together they worked in studios, showing his sculptures in galleries, and proving that even monsters can make beauty. But the scars never left. He once admitted he still woke up some nights sweating, haunted by faces from the past. After Caroline's death in 2010, the rage and grief nearly destroyed him again. He said he wanted to lie down and follow her. Only his dog, Blackie, kept him going until even that light went out. In the end, in 2021, Collins died quietly, in his chair, a chisel still resting near his workbench. The final proof that even the most violent man in Scotland found peace in creation. Now, if you want to hear more shocking stories about the dark and violent history of the UK, make sure to follow and subscribe. There is a lot more coming that you won't believe actually happened.